The party was perfect, which was the first sign something was terribly wrong. In my family, perfection is just a mask that hides the rot underneath. For 2 hours, though, the mask was holding. We were all in my parents' backyard, the one I had paid a landscaping crew a fortune to make presentable, under a white tent I had rented. My father was laughing, a sound I hadn't heard in years. My mother was holding court, telling some flattering, heavily edited story from her youth. Even my sister, Clara, looked serene, touching her stomach in a way that seemed odd at the time. My fiancé, Leo, squeezed my hand under the table. "You okay?" he whispered. He knew. He always knew. Then Clara stood up, clinked her champagne flute, and the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. "There's something you all need to know," she said, her voice bright and clear. "Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me." This whole cursed reunion was my idea, of course. It always was. It was my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, and if I didn't orchestrate some grand gesture, I would spend the next decade hearing about how I, Vanessa, their ever-reliable daughter, had let this momentous occasion slip by, uncelebrated. In my family, love wasn't a feeling, it was a debt, and I was perpetually in arrears. So I started planning. I found the venue, which was their own laughably overgrown backyard. I hired the caterers, the landscapers, the photographer. I designed the invitations. I paid for it all. My role in the family had been cemented since childhood. I was the designated adult, the fixer, the emotional, and, increasingly, financial shock absorber for a group of people who had perfected the art of weaponized incompetence. My parents, Ellen and Richard, were masters of passive aggression and guilt. They saw me not as a daughter, but as a high-functioning utility, a resource to be deployed as needed. My sister, Clara, was the masterpiece to my scaffolding. She was the golden child, the sun around which our dysfunctional little solar system revolved. She could do no wrong, and even when she did, it was somehow my fault for not anticipating her needs better. Leo, my fiancé, was the only person who saw it clearly. He was an outsider, a sane man who had wandered into our bespoke asylum and couldn't believe we all just acted like this was normal. He called our family dynamic the Clara Show, a one-woman performance where I was the exhausted, unpaid, and perpetually uncredited stage manager. He'd point out things that had been invisible to me for 30 years. "Why did you have to cancel your vacation because Clara decided she needed to move that weekend?" he'd ask, genuinely perplexed. "She has friends, she could have hired movers." I'd offer the usual tired excuses. "It's just easier this way. You know, Clara, it's better to just keep the peace." Leo would just shake his head. "It's easier for them, Vanessa. Not for you, keeping the peace." That was my life's work. It meant swallowing my own disappointment, paying for things I couldn't afford, and smiling through thinly veiled insults, all to maintain a fragile tranquility that could be shattered by a single one of Clara's moods. The year before, on my own birthday, my mother had called me in a panic. Clara's car had broken down. It wasn't an emergency, she was safely at home, but she had a yoga class she simply couldn't miss. The unspoken expectation hung heavy in the air. I was supposed to drop my own birthday dinner plans with Leo, drive 45 minutes across town to pick her up, take her to yoga, wait, and then drive her home. When I hesitated, my mother deployed her signature weapon, a sigh freighted with disappointment. "Fine, Vanessa. I just thought you'd want to help your sister. Family is supposed to be there for each other." Family. That word was a cudgel they used to beat me into submission every single time. I caved, of course. I always did. Leo's face when I told him was a mixture of frustration and sadness. "They didn't even ask," he said. "They just expected it." He was right. That was the core of it. I wasn't a person with my own life. I was a service they were entitled to. The planning for the anniversary party was a masterclass in their specific brand of dysfunction. It started 3 months prior with a phone call from my mother. "Vanessa, darling," she began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Your father and I were thinking, 40 years is such a milestone, we should really do something." Something simple, of course. Just family. I knew what just family meant. It meant a full-scale event, planned and funded by me, where they could play the gracious hosts without lifting a finger or opening their wallets. I made the mistake of agreeing. The demands started rolling in immediately. My mother wanted a specific type of French champagne that cost more per bottle than my weekly grocery budget. My father insisted on hiring a jazz trio he'd heard about, casually mentioning that the deposit was due by the end of the week. Clara, naturally, was too swamped with work to help with any of the actual labor, but she had an endless supply of opinions, all delivered through my mother. Clara thinks white roses are dreadfully boring, Vanessa. Can you get peonies? Clara mentioned that the caterer you picked is a bit pedestrian. She sent me a link to a much better one. The better one cost twice as much and specialized in artisanal, deconstructed canapés that looked more like modern art than food. Every conversation was a subtle negotiation, a battle of wills where I was the only one unarmed. Leo watched this unfold with the grim fascination of an anthropologist studying a newly discovered and particularly toxic tribe. He'd sit beside me on the couch while I was on the phone with my mother, watching my shoulders slowly creep up towards my ears. "Why are you paying for the tent rental?" he asked one night, after I got off a particularly grueling call. I recited my mantra, the one I had been telling myself for years. "It's just easier, Leo. If I don't do it, it won't get done, and then I'll have to listen to them complain about it forever. It's my contribution to keeping the peace." He looked at me, his expression serious. "That's not keeping the peace, Vanessa. That's funding the war. You're just paying to be their punching bag." His words were harsh, but they rang with a truth I wasn't ready to admit. The frog in the boiling water doesn't notice the temperature rising until it's too late. I had been in that pot for 3 decades, and the water was starting to simmer. A few weeks before the party, things escalated. My mother called, her voice a carefully calibrated mix of panic and accusation. "Vanessa, the photographer just called. He needs the final payment, and he said you haven't sent it. I had to put it on my card, and honestly, it's a little tight for us right now." I felt a familiar surge of guilt and frustration. I had sent the check a week ago. I told her as much. "Well, he certainly didn't get it," she sniffed. It was quite embarrassing, having to scramble like that. "You really should be more on top of these things, dear." She was gaslighting me, making me feel irresponsible for a problem that didn't even exist. I later confirmed with the photographer that he had received my check 2 days prior. My mother had never spoken to him. She had simply invented the crisis to make me feel indebted and to reinforce her narrative of me as competent, but slightly flaky, requiring her mature oversight. It was a power play, a way to remind me who was in charge, even as I was the one doing all the work and footing all the bills. Leo, my wonderful, grounded Leo, is an auditor. His job is to look at a sea of numbers and find the one that's out of place, the thread that, when pulled, unravels the entire tapestry of deception. He applies the same quiet, methodical logic to life, which is probably why my family's chaotic, emotionally driven nonsense set off every alarm bell in his head from the moment he met them. As the party planning intensified and my stress levels skyrocketed, he started to apply his professional skills to my personal life. It began with me venting on a Tuesday night, slumped over my laptop, staring at a spreadsheet of party expenses that was bleeding red ink. "I don't understand how it got this expensive," I muttered, rubbing my temples. "The caterer's final bill is $1,000 more than the quote. The florist charged me for a centerpiece delivery fee that was never mentioned." Leo pulled the laptop over. "Let me see the invoices," he said. He wasn't just being a supportive fiancé. He was a professional smelling a problem. For the next few nights, he worked quietly after I went to bed. I'd wake up in the morning and find him at the kitchen table, surrounded by my receipts, printouts of my bank statements, and a yellow legal pad covered in his neat, precise handwriting. I thought he was just trying to help me budget. I had no idea he was conducting a full-blown forensic audit of my life. He didn't say anything to me at first. He knew I was already fragile, stretched thin by my family's relentless demands. He didn't want to add a new, terrifying suspicion to my plate until he was absolutely sure. So he dug. He started with the party vendors. He called the caterer, posing as my assistant, and asked for a detailed breakdown of the final bill. He discovered that my mother had called them a week after I signed the contract and upgraded the bar package to include top-shelf liquor and a specialty cocktail named the Ellen and Richard. An upgrade, she assured the caterer. Vanessa had approved. He found similar stories with the florist and the rental company. My parents and Clara were going behind my back, using my name and my credit card on file to get what they wanted, all while maintaining the fiction that this was my simple family party. I remained blissfully ignorant, attributing my financial anxieties and exhaustion to my own poor planning. I was so conditioned to accept the blame that it never occurred to me that I was being actively sabotaged. I just worked harder, picked up extra shifts at my job as a graphic designer, and told myself that once the party was over, I could finally relax and get my finances back in order. Leo would watch me, his expression a mixture of anger and deep concern. He saw the strings, and he was beginning to see the puppeteers who were pulling them. He was just waiting for the right moment to show me that I wasn't just tired, I was being systematically drained. The quiet clicks of his keyboard late at night were the sounds of my prison walls being mapped, not for escape, but for demolition. He was giving me the one thing my family had denied me my entire life, the truth. The human mind has an incredible capacity for self-deception. We build narratives to survive, and my narrative was that I was the strong one, the capable one, the one who could handle it all. Admitting that I was a victim felt like admitting I was weak, so I buried the evidence. Every time my family betrayed me in some small way, I'd pack the memory away in a mental box, label it misunderstanding, and shove it into a dark corner of my brain. But now, with Leo's quiet investigation proceeding in the background, those boxes were starting to shake, their lids rattling. I started to remember things. I remembered my 21st birthday. My parents had given me a card with a check for $5,000 inside. It was a fortune to me then. They said it was an advance on my inheritance from my grandmother, to help me get started after college. I was ecstatic. A week later, my mother called me, crying. Clara had been presented with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to join an unpaid internship program in London for the summer. It was her dream. The only problem was the cost of the flight and the deposit for the flat. "We just don't have it, Vanessa." My mother sobbed. She's going to be heartbroken. The implication was clear, that $5,000 wasn't a gift for me. It was a fund they had temporarily placed in my account. I handed it over, of course. Clara went to London and posted endless photos of herself in pubs and museums. The money was never mentioned again. When I cautiously brought it up a year later, my mother looked at me with genuine confusion. "What money, dear? We gave you that for Clara." The narrative had been retroactively edited. It was a family contribution, and I was selfish for thinking of it as my own. Then there was the matter of my grandmother's ring. It was a beautiful, simple sapphire, and she had promised it to me since I was a little girl. "For you, Vanessa," she'd say, tapping my nose. "You're my sensible one. You'll take care of it." After she passed, the ring was nowhere to be found. My mother claimed it must have been lost in the estate sale. I was devastated. 2 years later, I saw it on Clara's hand in a photo she posted online. I called my mother, my voice shaking. "Oh, that," she said breezily. "We found it in an old jewelry box. I gave it to Clara. You know how much she loves blue. It just looks so much better on her, don't you think? Her fingers are more delicate than yours." It wasn't just that she had been given my ring, it was the casual cruelty of the explanation. I wasn't just denied my inheritance, I was found physically unworthy of it. Each of these memories, viewed in isolation, seemed like a minor injustice, a typical bit of family favoritism. But stacked on top of each other, they formed a pattern, a blueprint of my designated role. I was the family's infrastructure, dependable, sturdy, and completely taken for granted. Clara was the monument they built on top of me, a beautiful, decorative structure that required constant maintenance and admiration. And my parents were the architects, sacrificing the foundation for the sake of the facade. A week before the party, the ice sculpture broke me. It was such a small, ridiculous thing, but it was the final straw that destabilized the entire precarious structure of my denial. My mother called on a Monday morning. "Good news, darling," she chirped, a tone that always signaled an incoming demand. "Clara had the most wonderful idea. Her friend's brother is an ice sculptor, and he can do a beautiful carving of 2 swans for the party. a little symbol of your father and me. Isn't that romantic? I took a deep breath, picturing my already hemorrhaging budget. Mom, that sounds lovely, but I really don't think we can afford any extras. We're already way over what I'd planned. The line went quiet for a moment, then the chill set in. Vanessa, don't be so dramatic and selfish, she said, her voice low and sharp. This isn't about money, this is about honoring your father and me. After all we've done for you, this is about family. There it was again. The word. Family. The get-out-of-jail-free card for any and all bad behavior. I felt something snap inside me. For the first time in my life, I didn't back down. No, I said, my own voice surprising me with its firmness. It is about money, because I'm the one paying for it, and I'm telling you there is no more money. There will be no ice swans. I hung up before she could respond, my hand trembling. I felt a dizzying mix of terror and exhilaration. I had set a boundary, a real one. The victory was short-lived. An hour later, I got a notification from my credit card company. A charge for $750 from Elegant Ice Creations. She had gone behind my back and done it anyway, using the card details she had wheedled out of me months ago for a catering deposit. I sank onto the couch, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a cold, heavy sense of defeat. That's how Leo found me when he came home from work. He took one look at my face and knew. What did they do now? He asked, his voice gentle. I told him about the ice swans. I expected him to be angry, to rant about my mother's audacity. Instead, he just nodded slowly. Okay, he said, it's time. He went to his briefcase and pulled out a thin file folder. He sat next to me on the couch and opened it. I didn't want to show you this until I was sure, he said. I didn't want to hurt you, but you deserve to know what's really going on. Inside the folder were papers, bank statements, credit reports, and public records. My name was on some of them, next to my parents' names. What is this? I whispered. It's the truth, he said, his eyes full of a pain that mirrored my own. They're not just taking advantage of you, Vanessa. They're drowning, and they've been using you as a life raft for years. Leo laid the documents out on our coffee table like a surgeon arranging his instruments. Each piece of paper was a sterile, undeniable piece of a diseased whole. He had started by auditing the party, but he had ended up auditing my entire life, and the findings were devastating. Your parents' house, he began, pointing to a property record. They have 2 mortgages on it. The second one was taken out 3 years ago. They've been pulling all the equity out of it. My parents lived in a modest suburban home they had bought 30 years ago. It should have been nearly paid off. For what? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Leo slid a series of my father's credit card statements across the table. The charges were a litany of Clara's life. Rent payments for a luxury apartment downtown that she claimed she could afford on her freelance marketing salary, payments to a high-end car lease, thousands of dollars at designer boutiques. My parents weren't just subsidizing her life, they were funding a fantasy, a lifestyle completely disconnected from her reality, and they were bankrupting themselves to do it, but that was only the beginning. The real betrayal, the one that made the air leave my lungs, was the next set of papers he showed me. They were loan applications. Student loan consolidations and personal credit lines, all from about 10 years ago, right after I had graduated from college. My signature was on them, a loopy, optimistic scrawl I barely recognized. And right next to it was my father's signature, as a co-signer. I don't remember this, I said, my mind racing, trying to piece it together. It was right after you graduated, Leo said, his voice soft but firm. Your dad said he wanted to help you manage your student debt. He told you it was just some paperwork to get you a better interest rate, to get you started on the right foot. I remembered. I had been so grateful. My dad, who had always been so distant and vague about money, was finally taking an interest, helping me be a responsible adult. I had signed where he told me to sign, relieved to have his guidance. But it wasn't my debt he was consolidating. He had rolled his own high-interest credit card debt and a personal loan into my student loan package. Because my credit was clean and my future earning potential was a tangible asset, the bank approved it without a second thought. For 10 years, a portion of every student loan payment I had religiously made was going to pay off his secret debts. The help he was giving me, The extra $100 he'd sometimes send for my loan payments wasn't generosity. It was a calculated move to ensure the debt he had secretly shackled me to was being serviced. I felt a coldness spread through my chest, a chilling, profound understanding. Every sacrifice I had ever made, every extra shift I had picked up, every vacation I had skipped to be financially responsible was a lie. I wasn't getting ahead. I was just a cog in their machine, a reliable source of income to keep their toxic, deceitful family enterprise afloat. The anniversary party wasn't a celebration, it was a distraction, a glittering facade to hide the rot that had set in long ago. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the rustling of the papers as I stared at them, trying to make sense of the new reality they represented. My life as I knew it had been a carefully constructed fiction, and the people I called family were the authors. I felt a wave of nausea. The first emotion wasn't anger, but a deep, gut-wrenching shame. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let this happen for so long? I had prided myself on my competence, my ability to see a problem and solve it. But I had failed to see the biggest problem of all, the one living right in the center of my life. Leo must have seen the self-blame in my eyes. He reached out and put his hand over mine. "This is not your fault, Vanessa," he said, his voice fierce. "This is a masterful deception, perfected over decades. They trained you from birth to not ask questions, to trust them implicitly, to put their needs before your own. You're not weak for believing them. You were a child they failed to protect, and an adult they chose to exploit." His words were a balm, extinguishing the fire of my shame and leaving in its place the slow, simmering heat of rage. Righteous anger. It felt clean, pure. They had stolen from me, not just money, but years of my life, my peace of mind, my trust. They had made me the unwitting janitor of their secret messes, and I was done cleaning up. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling with this new, unfamiliar power. "We could call them right now," Leo said, his tone perfectly even. "We could confront them. We can call a lawyer. We can burn it all to the ground before Saturday." The thought was tempting. A huge, dramatic explosion that would obliterate everything. But then I pictured it, the screaming, the crying, the accusations. My mother would somehow twist it to be my fault. My father would retreat into stony silence. Clara would claim to be the real victim. It would be another scene in their endless, exhausting drama, and I would once again be at the center of the storm. "No," I said, a cold clarity settling over me. "No. I've paid for this party. I've worked for months on it. They want a perfect day? They want a show? Then we're going to give them one. I'm going to go to that party, and I'm going to watch them. I need to see them one last time in their natural habitat and see how they act when they don't know that I know everything." Leo nodded, understanding completely. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. I needed to take back the narrative. I had spent my entire life playing a role they had written for me. For one more day, I would play that role, but this time, I would be aware. I would be a spy in my own life, gathering the final pieces of evidence I needed to justify my own liberation. The party was no longer an obligation, it was an opportunity, a chance to say a final, silent goodbye to the family I thought I had, and to meet the predators who had been wearing their faces all along. Walking into my parents' backyard on the day of the party was a surreal experience, like stepping onto a meticulously designed movie set for a film about a happy family. The white tent billowed softly in the breeze. The jazz trio my father had insisted on was playing something smooth and unobtrusive in the corner. Waiters circulated with trays of the expensive champagne my mother had demanded. And there, by the newly planted flower beds, gleaming in the afternoon sun, was the $750 ice sculpture of two swans, already beginning to weep in the heat. It was all so perfect, so completely divorced from the ugly truth I now carried inside me. Leo's hand was a warm, solid presence at the small of my back, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone in this. My mother rushed toward us, her arms outstretched. "Vanessa, darling, you're here. Everything looks absolutely wonderful. You've outdone yourself as usual." She kissed the air next to my cheek, her perfume cloying and sweet. It was the same perfume she'd worn my entire life, but for the first time it smelled like deceit. I smiled, a brittle, unfamiliar expression on my own face. I'm glad you like it, Mom. My father came over and clapped me on the shoulder. Good job, Ness, he said, his eyes scanning the crowd already moving on. He had always been a man of few words, and I used to interpret his silence as a sign of quiet strength. Now I saw it for what it was: evasion, a way to avoid accountability, to never have to explain himself. He couldn't lie if he never spoke. Clara drifted over, looking radiant in a flowing sundress that did little to hide the slight swell of her belly I'd noticed earlier. Nessa, this is amazing, she gushed. You're a miracle worker. She hugged me, a brief, papery embrace that felt like a business transaction. There was no warmth in it, only the perfunctory gesture of sisterly affection. I looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time, the golden child, the one for whom all sacrifices were made. I had spent my life loving her, resenting her, and protecting her in equal measure. Now, I just felt a profound and weary emptiness. She wasn't my rival, she was the centerpiece of the con. The beautiful, expensive distraction designed to keep my eyes off what was really happening to my wallet and my life. I was a collage, that's what Leo had said. A collection of parts of myself that I had given away to them over the years, until there was barely anything left of the original picture. And looking at them now, all three of them smiling, accepting praise for a party they had manipulated me into creating, I knew he was right. I was here to collect the pieces. I was done being their collage. It was time to become a person again. The next hour was a masterclass in performance art. I mingled. I smiled. I accepted compliments on their behalf. Oh, Vanessa, your mother looks so happy, my Aunt Carol said, clutching my arm. You're such a good daughter to have done all this for them. I just smiled and nodded, a silent scream building in my throat. A good daughter. Was that what I was? Or was I just a good investment? A reliable asset that could be liquidated whenever they needed a cash infusion? I watched my father hold court with his brothers, laughing and accepting their backslaps. He looked like the patriarch of a successful, happy family, a man of substance. He was a phantom, a man whose entire life was propped up by secret debt and the daughter he had systematically defrauded. He caught my eye from across the lawn and raised his glass in a toast. I raised mine back, my hand steady, my expression placid. Inside, I felt nothing but a cold, hard knot of contempt. Leo stayed close, a silent bodyguard for my fracturing psyche. When my Uncle Robert pulled me into a boisterous hug and said, "Your parents are so lucky to have you, Vanessa. Clara is the beauty, but you're the brains and the heart of this family." Leo stepped in smoothly. "She certainly is," he said, his arm sliding around my waist. "I'm the lucky one." It was a simple act, but it was a profound declaration. He was claiming me, drawing a line in the sand. I was with him now, not with them. The most surreal conversation was with my mother. She pulled me aside near the catering tent, a conspiratorial glint in her eye. "Darling," she whispered, though no one was near, "I just wanted to thank you. This is more than we could have hoped for." She touched the sleeve of my dress. "You've always been the strong one, the one we can count on, Clara. Well, you know. She's a creative soul. She's not built for this kind of thing. Responsibility just weighs her down." It was the oldest story in our family's playbook, justifying Clara's helplessness to reinforce my supposed strength. It wasn't a compliment, it was a job description. I was strong so they could be weak. I was responsible so they could be reckless. I had carried that burden for 30 years, believing it was a sign of my virtue. But it wasn't virtue, it was a cage. My mother looked at me, her eyes shining with what I used to think was pride. I see it now. It was relief. The relief of a con artist who has just watched their mark willingly pay for the rope they're about to be hung with. "You're welcome, Mom," I said, my voice even. I was proud of myself for not letting the rage show. I was a quiet bomb, and the timer was still ticking. I would not give them the satisfaction of exploding on their terms. The toast began just as the sun started to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was all so picturesque, a perfect backdrop for the perfect lie. My father, ever the man of few words, stood up first. He cleared his throat, looking at my mother. "To Ellen?" he said, his voice thick with a manufactured emotion I now recognized as performance. 40 years, You've made me the happiest man alive. He didn't look at me once. Why would he? In his mind, I was just part of the scenery, the hired help who had set the stage for his big moment. He sat down to a round of sentimental applause. A few other relatives stood up, telling sanitized anecdotes from my parents' past, painting a portrait of a marriage built on love and mutual respect. I felt like I was in a parallel universe. Were we talking about the same two people who communicated almost exclusively through passive aggression and unspoken resentments? Leo leaned over and whispered in my ear, his breath warm against my skin. It's like watching a nature documentary, but about a species that survives by devouring its own young. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my chest, and I had to disguise it as a cough. His dark, sarcastic humor was the only thing keeping me sane. Then, it was time. Clara stood up, tapping her champagne flute with a knife. The light chatter died down instantly. All eyes went to her. The golden child was about to speak. She had a glow about her, a radiance that I now understood was fueled by my money and my future. She looked so happy, so carefree. It was the happiness of someone who has never had to worry about a bill, never had to stay up late agonizing over a budget, never had to say no to a desire. It was the happiness I had paid for. She looked around the tent, her eyes sweeping over the adoring faces of our relatives. Then, her gaze landed on me. She smiled, a wide, beatific smile that didn't reach her eyes. There was something else there, something I'd never seen before. It wasn't malice, it was something worse. It was pity, the pity of a queen for a loyal, hard-working servant. It was in that moment I knew. This speech wasn't going to be a simple, loving tribute. It was going to be an announcement, a proclamation, and I was going to be the subject. The hand that Leo was holding under the table tightened, his knuckles pressing into mine. He felt it too, the shift in the atmosphere. The curtain was about to rise on the final act of the Clara show, and I had a terrible feeling I had been cast in the starring role, without ever seeing a script. Her voice, when she spoke, was as bright and clear as a bell, ringing out across the silent yard. There's something you all need to know. The silence that followed was absolute. For a split second, a wild, improbable hope flared in my chest. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the moment her conscience, a long dormant and presumed extinct organ, had finally sputtered to life. Maybe she was going to confess. Maybe she would tell everyone about the money, about the lies, about the immense pressure they had put on me for years. Maybe she was going to stand up and say, "This beautiful party is a lie, paid for by my sister, who has been propping up this family for a decade." It was a foolish, naive thought, the last gasp of the old Vanessa, who believed in the inherent goodness of her family. That Vanessa died right there, in that white tent. As Clara took a dramatic pause and placed a hand on her slightly rounded stomach. "I'm pregnant," she announced, her voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed emotion. The tent erupted. Gasps of delight, applause, a chorus of congratulations. My mother burst into theatrical tears, and my father rushed to Clara's side, hugging her tightly. It was a perfect, heartwarming family moment. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. This wasn't the confession. This was the wind-up for the pitch. Leo squeezed my hand, a silent signal. "Stay calm, watch the show." After the initial wave of excitement died down, Clara raised her hand for silence. She had more to say. Of course she did. "My boyfriend, Kyle, and I are so excited to start our family," she continued, her eyes shining. "But, as some of you know, it's been a difficult few years for us financially." She glanced at my parents, who were now flanking her, looking solemn and concerned. It was a masterful performance. They were painting a picture of a brave young couple facing economic hardship, and with Mom and Dad's situation, we were worried. She let that hang in the air. The situation. The carefully vague term for the financial black hole they had created. I saw some of my aunts and uncles exchange concerned glances. The hook was set. Now she was reeling them in. And then she turned her gaze back to me. The pity was gone. In its place was a look of serene, unshakable entitlement. "But then we remembered what family is all about," she said, her voice swelling with false sincerity. "It's about being there for each other, in good times and in bad." She was co-opting my own mantra, The very words they had used to manipulate me for years, and she was turning it into a weapon against me, in public. I could see where this was going. It was a train I had seen coming my whole life, and I was tied to the tracks. The final, audacious punchline was about to land, and it was going to be broadcast to everyone I knew. I felt strangely calm. The dread was gone, replaced by the crystal-clear focus that comes when you know you are about to witness the car crash you've been anticipating for miles. Because of Mom and Dad's difficult financial situation, Clara continued, her voice now a symphony of feigned vulnerability and strength, Kyle and I have decided to move in with them. To help out, you know. To be there for them. She framed it as a sacrifice on her part, a noble act of a loving daughter returning to the nest to care for her aging parents. The relatives nodded, their faces full of sympathy and admiration. What a good girl, that Clara, always thinking of her family. I wanted to laugh, to stand up and scream, move in with them? To help out? They were moving in because they were broke, and my parents were broke, and they were about to consolidate their collective helplessness under one roof, the roof that I was, through the secret loans, still paying for. But the masterstroke was yet to come. She saved the very best for last. She raised her glass, which a waiter had discreetly refilled with sparkling water, and looked directly at me. She turned to follow her gaze. I was pinned in the spotlight, a bug under a magnifying glass. And we wouldn't be able to do any of this, she proclaimed, her voice ringing with triumph, if it weren't for my wonderful, generous sister Vanessa. The silence was deafening. I could feel every eye on me. Her incredible generosity in funding this beautiful party and, well, everything else, she added with a knowing little laugh, as if we were all in on a private joke, has made it possible for us to start our family without any financial worries. It's given all of us such peace of mind. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't an exposé. It was an escalation. It was a public coronation. She had just, in front of our entire extended family, declared me the official, permanent sponsor of her baby, and our bankrupt parents. She wasn't just acknowledging my role as the family ATM. She was cementing it, making it a public fact, trapping me in a cage of social expectation and familial duty. There was an unspoken threat in her words. You can't cut us off now. Everyone is watching. They all know you're the generous one. If you stop, you'll look like the villain. The applause that followed was scattered at first, then grew as people took their cue. They were clapping for me, for my supposed generosity. They looked at me with a mixture of awe and pity. What a sister, someone murmured behind me. My parents were beaming, their faces glowing with pride. It was the proud look of slave owners admiring the strength of their most productive worker. They had done it. They had checkmated me. In one fell swoop, they had guaranteed their financial future, solved Clara's housing problem, and painted me into a corner I could never escape from. Or so they thought. They made one critical miscalculation. They assumed I was the same Vanessa I had always been. They didn't know that the woman sitting at that table was a stranger to them, a woman who had spent the last week reading her own financial autopsy report. They thought they were closing the cage door. They had no idea I was holding a blowtorch. For a long moment I did nothing. I just sat there, the applause washing over me, and I let myself feel the full, unadulterated force of their betrayal. It was breathtaking in its audacity. This wasn't just a moment of selfishness. This was a strategic, premeditated act of war. They had planned this. The party wasn't just a party, it was a stage. They had gathered the entire family as an audience to witness my public surrender. They had used my money to build the very platform from which they would announce my lifelong indentured servitude. Clara's pregnancy, her financial woes, my parents' situation, it was all a perfectly woven narrative designed for one purpose, to ensure my compliance. They were announcing a new phase of our family business, and I was the sole investor, with no voting rights and unlimited liability. I looked at Leo. He wasn't looking at me. His gaze was fixed on my family, and his expression was one of cold, quiet fury. He had seen predators before in his work, people who charmed and manipulated their way into others' finances. But to see it happen so brazenly, so cruelly, to the person he loved, it was different. He had given me the truth, and now he was giving me his silent, unwavering support. He didn't need to say a word. I knew he would back any play I made. My mother caught my eye and gave me a little wink, a gesture of shared victory. "We did it," the wink said. "We secured the asset." That wink was the final insult. It was the casual, confident gesture of the con artist who thinks the mark is not only fooled, but is happy about it. It was the belief that I was not a person with my own thoughts and feelings, but a problem that had been successfully managed. The rage that had been simmering inside me for a week didn't explode. It went cold. It sharpened into a diamond-hard point of clarity. There was only one thing to do. The performance was over. My role in their sick little play was officially concluded. I pushed my chair back from the table. The sound scraped loudly in the sudden lull after the applause. Every head turned back towards me. My mother's smile faltered. Clara's triumphant expression flickered with uncertainty. My father, for the first time that day, looked directly at me, a flicker of apprehension in his eyes. They had expected me to blush, to smile demurely, to accept my fate as the family martyr. They did not expect me to stand up. Leo stood up with me, a silent, solid presence by my side. I didn't walk towards the microphone they had set up for the toasts. I didn't need amplification. My voice, when it came out, was quiet, but it carried across the lawn with the unnerving clarity of a verdict being read. "No," I said. It was a single word, but it was the most powerful word I had ever spoken. It was a complete sentence. It was a declaration of independence. The silence that followed my single word was more profound than the one that had preceded Clara's speech. It was a silence filled with confusion and shock. The happy, celebratory atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a tense, uncomfortable stillness. I looked directly at Clara, then at my parents, who were still standing beside her like a royal family posing for an official portrait. "No," I said again, my voice stronger this time. "No, Clara. I will not be funding your new life." My mother took a step forward, her face a mask of disbelief and outrage. "Vanessa, what are you doing?" she hissed, her voice low but carrying. "You're making a scene." "Am I?" I asked, a genuine question. Because from where I'm standing, the scene was already made. The one where my sister announces to our entire family that she sees me as a living trust fund for her and her unborn child. Clara's face had gone pale. The radiant glow was gone, replaced by a petulant, confused frown. This was not in the script. The ATM was not supposed to talk back. "I didn't say that," she stammered, looking to our parents for support. "I said we were grateful for your generosity." "Let's talk about generosity," I said, my voice still unnervingly calm. I took a step toward them. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't crying. I was simply stating facts, and the cold, hard weight of those facts was more devastating than any emotional outburst could have been. "Is it generous to have your parents secretly co-sign you onto their personal loans when you're 22 years old? Is it generous to spend 10 years paying off debt you didn't even know was yours?" My father flinched, as if I had physically struck him. My mother's mouth opened, but no sound came out. A murmur went through the crowd of relatives. This was more than a simple family squabble. This was the pulling of a thread that was about to unravel everything. "Is it generous?" I continued, my gaze locking onto my mother. "To use my credit card behind my back to upgrade party packages and order $700 ice sculptures, and then lie about it? Is it generous to create a constant state of manufactured crisis so that I always feel too guilty to say no?" I turned back to Clara. "And is it generous to stand up here and publicly declare that my financial support is a given, a resource you are entitled to, for the rest of my life? No, that isn't generosity. That is exploitation. And it ends, today, right now." I let my words hang in the air. The perfect party was now the setting for the ugliest of truths. The mask was not just shattered, I had ground the pieces to dust under my heel. I had taken their carefully crafted narrative and set it on fire. The immediate aftermath of my declaration was chaos. My Aunt Carol gasped, a hand flying to her chest. My Uncle Robert, who had just called me the heart of the family, looked at my father with a new, questioning expression. The jazz trio had stopped playing. The only sound was the gentle, mocking trickle of the melting ice swans. My mother was the first to recover. Her shock morphed into a familiar, potent fury. "How dare you?" she seethed, her voice trembling with rage. How dare you air our private family business in front of everyone? You are selfish and ungrateful. After everything we have done for you, this is how you repay us? It was a desperate, last-ditch attempt to use the old weapons, guilt, shame, the invocation of family loyalty. But the weapons had lost their power. Everything you've done for me? I asked, and this time I did laugh. It was a short, bitter, humorless sound. You mean everything you've done to me? You've done nothing but take. You've taken my money, my time, my energy, and my trust. You've built your lives on a foundation of my sacrifices, and you have the audacity to call me ungrateful. My father finally spoke, his voice a low growl. That's enough, Vanessa. No, I said, turning to him. It's not enough. It's not even close to the beginning. For 10 years, I've been paying your debts. Did you ever stop to think about what I had to give up to do that? The vacations I didn't take? The savings I couldn't build? The wedding Leo and I have had to postpone because I was always trying to catch up, to be responsible. Clara, seeing her dream of a fully sponsored life evaporating before her eyes, finally found her voice. And it was the voice of a spoiled child who has just had her favorite toy taken away. You're ruining everything, she shrieked, tears welling in her eyes. You're ruining the party. You're ruining my announcement. You're just jealous. You've always been jealous of me. It was so predictable, so pathetically on brand, that I almost felt sorry for her. Jealousy was the only lens through which she could view my actions, because it was the only emotion she truly understood. She couldn't comprehend that this wasn't about her. It was about me. It was about my survival. You're right, Clara, I said, my voice softening into a tone of finality. I am ruining the party. The party is over. I turned to Leo. Let's go. We turned and began to walk away. We didn't run. We walked, slowly and deliberately, through the stunned crowd of our relatives, past the expensive catering, under the white tent I had paid for. As we reached the edge of the lawn, my mother's voice, now shrill with panic, called out one last time. You can't just leave. Family doesn't just leave. I stopped, but I didn't turn around. I spoke over my shoulder, my voice clear and final, a closing statement for the entire sorry affair. You're not my family, I said. You're just a collection of bad debts, and I'm writing you off. And then we kept walking, leaving the ruins of their perfect day behind us. The car ride home was silent. There was nothing to say. The explosion had been so total, so absolute, that words felt inadequate. I stared out the passenger window, watching the neat suburban houses slide by, each one a little diorama of a life I could only guess at. Were they happy? Were they functional? Or were they all just better at hiding the rot? When we pulled into our driveway, Leo turned off the engine, and the silence in the car became even more profound. He didn't rush me. He just sat there waiting. Finally, I turned to him. A single tear traced a path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or anger. It was a tear of release. It's over, I whispered. It's really over. Yes, he said, his voice full of a love so deep and steady it felt like the only solid thing in my universe. It's over. We went inside, and the moment the door closed behind us, the adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins for the past 24 hours vanished, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. I felt like I had just finished a marathon. I didn't even know I was running. Before I could collapse, my phone started to buzz. A text from my mother. I looked at the screen. You have broken your father's heart. I hope you're happy. I deleted it without replying. It buzzed again. An unknown number. A voicemail appeared. It was my Aunt Carol. Vanessa, honey, I think you were a little harsh. Her voice warbled with misplaced sympathy. Your mother is devastated. Maybe you should call her. Delete. Then the floodgates opened. A deluge of texts, calls, and voicemails from a rotating cast of family members. Some were angry, calling me cruel and disrespectful. Others were pleading, urging me to apologize and fix this. They were all variations on the same theme. I had disrupted the system. I had broken the unspoken rule that Vanessa cleans up the messes, that Vanessa keeps the peace, that Vanessa pays. They weren't angry because I had hurt my parents' feelings. They were terrified because the family's primary source of funding had just gone offline, and they were all beneficiaries, in one way or another, of that system. Leo took the phone from my hand. "You don't need to listen to this," he said. He powered it down and put it in a drawer. "Let's block them all, we'll do it tomorrow. Tonight we rest." The next morning, we did just that. It was a methodical, strangely satisfying ritual. We sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee and went through my contacts. Mom, block. Dad, block. Clara, block. Aunt Carol, Uncle Robert, my well-meaning but spineless cousins, block, block, block. With each tap of the screen, I felt a weight lift. It was like I was pruning a dead, diseased tree from my life, cutting away the branches that had been choking me for years. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my own life, waiting to begin. In the weeks that followed, the silence was occasionally punctuated by attempts from my former family to breach the walls I had built. They tried new tactics. Emails arrived, their subject lines a desperate mix of, "We need to talk," and "I'm worried about you." I created a filter that sent any message from their known addresses directly to the trash. I didn't want to read their lies, their justifications, their attempts to rewrite history and cast me as the unstable, irrational villain. I knew their playbook by heart, and I was no longer interested in reading from their script. Then the flying monkeys arrived. Distant cousins and old family friends started reaching out. "I just spoke to your mother," one message began, "and she's just beside herself with grief." They were messengers, sent to deliver the same old payload of guilt, but from a different vector. I politely but firmly shut them down. "This is a private matter, and I'm not going to discuss it. I appreciate your concern, but my decision is final." Most of them retreated, not wanting to get caught in the crossfire. A few persistent ones got blocked as well. My life became a fortress, and the only person with a key was Leo. It was during this time that we finally took the first concrete steps toward untangling the financial mess. We met with a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davies, who specialized in financial fraud. I spread the documents Leo had collected across her polished mahogany desk. She listened to my story without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she looked at the loan agreements I had signed all those years ago. "This is a classic case of financial abuse and fraudulent misrepresentation," she said, her voice devoid of pity but full of professional resolve. "Your father exploited your trust and his position as your parent to induce you into co-signing debt under false pretenses. We have a strong case." Hearing it framed in such stark legal terms was incredibly validating. It wasn't a family issue. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a crime. Miss Davies laid out a plan. We would send a formal demand letter to my parents, outlining the fraud and proposing a settlement where they would assume full responsibility for the loans and remove my name from them. If they refused, we would pursue legal action. "It will be a fight," she warned me. "They will try to paint you as a liar, as greedy, as mentally unstable. Are you prepared for that?" I looked at Leo, who squeezed my hand. Then I looked back at the lawyer. "I've been fighting them my whole life without even knowing it," I said. "The only difference is that now I know I can win." It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about justice. It was about clearing my name, not just from a loan document, but from the false narrative they had written for my entire life. While the legal battles slowly churned in the background, my real life began to blossom in the foreground. It started with small things. I noticed I was sleeping through the night for the first time in years. The constant, low-grade anxiety that had been my companion for so long had vanished. I wasn't constantly waiting for the next phone call, the next manufactured crisis, the next demand on my time or my bank account. The peace was staggering. Leo and I started planning our wedding again. This time it was different. We weren't trying to squeeze our plans into the cracks of my family's endless needs. We were the priority. We decided on a small ceremony at City Hall, followed by a celebratory dinner with a handful of our closest friends, the family we had chosen for ourselves. There would be no drama, no exorbitant demands, no ice swans, just love and good food. One afternoon, I was working on the design for our wedding invitations when I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of joy. It was so pure, so unfamiliar, that it brought tears to my eyes. I was creating something for myself. My time, my talent, my energy, it was all mine. I wasn't a resource to be plundered anymore. I was a person, building my own future, a future that my parents and sister had no claim to. I started to rediscover parts of myself I had forgotten existed. I took up hiking again, a passion I had abandoned because I was always too busy, on weekends helping Clara move or running errands for my parents. I started reading for pleasure, not just for work. Leo and I would spend entire Sundays doing nothing but drinking coffee, reading the paper, and talking. It felt like a decadent luxury. The news from the other side came in whispers and second-hand reports. My cousin, one of the few who had remained neutral, let it slip during a brief phone call that my parents had been forced to sell their house. The one they had secretly mortgaged to the hilt to fund Clara's lifestyle. They had to move into a small rental apartment. Clara and her boyfriend, Kyle, had not moved in with them after all. Apparently, the reality of living with my broke, bitter parents in a cramped two-bedroom apartment was not the idyllic family situation she had envisioned. Last I heard, she and Kyle were living with his parents, and she was working a retail job to save up for the baby. There was a part of me, a small, conditioned part, that felt a flicker of guilt. But it was quickly extinguished by the stronger, healthier part of me that knew this was not my fault. This was the natural consequence of their own choices. They had built a house of cards, and all I had done was refuse to be one of the cards anymore. Their collapse was inevitable. I had just decided to get out before it came down on top of me. The demand letter from Ms. Davies landed like a grenade in my parents' new, downsized life. Their response was predictable. At first, there was denial. They sent a rambling, self-pitying letter back to my lawyer, not even written by their own attorney, claiming it was all a terrible misunderstanding. They said I was confused, that I was being manipulated by Leo, that my memory of events was flawed. It was a pathetic attempt at gaslighting, and Miss Davies shredded it in her formal reply. Then the anger came. My father left a rambling, furious voicemail on my lawyer's office line, accusing her of being a vulture and threatening a countersuit for defamation. It was the desperate roar of a cornered animal, and it only strengthened our position. Finally, facing the very real threat of being taken to court and having their financial deception exposed in public records, they capitulated. They agreed to work with the bank to refinance the loans solely in their names. It would be a long and complicated process, requiring them to prove they had the income to support the debt, which of course they didn't, but the legal wheels were in motion. The responsibility was now officially, legally, theirs. The day I received the letter from Ms. Davies confirming their agreement was not the triumphant, celebratory day I had imagined. I felt a profound sense of relief, but it was coloured by a deep, lingering sadness. It was the final, official confirmation of everything I had lost. It was the death certificate for the family I had once believed I had. Leo found me sitting quietly in the living room, holding the letter. He didn't say, "I told you so," or, "Aren't you glad it's over?" He just sat next to me and put his arm around me. "It's okay to grieve," he said. "You're not grieving them as they are. You're grieving the parents and the sister you should have had." And he was right. I was mourning a fantasy. The fantasy of a mother who protected me instead of using me. The fantasy of a father who provided for me instead of stealing from me. The fantasy of a sister who loved me as an equal instead of viewing me as a stepping stone. That night I let myself cry for that fantasy. I cried for the little girl who always tried so hard to be good enough, not realizing the game was rigged from the start. I cried for the young woman who had sacrificed so much for a family that was nothing more than a fiction. And when the tears were done, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The mourning was over. The past was finally where it belonged, behind me. It's been a year now. Leo and I got married at City Hall on a crisp autumn afternoon. Our witnesses were our two best friends. Afterward, we went to our favourite Italian restaurant and drank Champagne mid-range Prosecco that we paid for ourselves. It was the happiest day of my life. My name is officially clear from all those old debts. My parents had to declare bankruptcy. The house is gone, the cars are gone, the facade is gone. I have no idea how they're surviving, and for the first time in my life, I don't feel responsible for it. Their choices have finally, irrevocably, caught up with them. Clara had her baby, a little girl. I saw a picture of her on a cousin's social media feed. I felt a pang of something, not for Clara, but for that innocent child, born into such a legacy of dysfunction. I can only hope she breaks the cycle, but that is her story to write, not mine. My life is quiet now. It is filled with love and respect and peace. It is filled with the simple joy of knowing that my future is my own. I built it, I earned it, and no one can take it from me. The vindication I feel isn't loud or triumphant. It's not about watching them fail. It's the quiet, steady hum of my own contentment. It's the freedom of not having to check my bank account in a panic, of not having my stomach clench every time the phone rings. It's the simple, profound relief of being free. My mother tried to reach me one last time a few months ago, through one of Leo's relatives. The message was the same old song. I had abandoned my family in their greatest time of need. I was a cruel, heartless daughter. For a moment, the old guilt tried to surface, like a ghost rattling its chains. But I silenced it with the truth. They were not my family in my time of need. They were the cause of it, so I'll leave it up to you. They say I abandoned them when they needed me most. I say I saved myself. Let me know what you think. Did I go too far, or not far enough?